Welcome to Tonebender's Sound Design Podcast, presented by Sound Ideas. This is the show where we talk with the sonic artists behind our favorite films, games, and series. Check out one of Sound Ideas' latest new libraries, the General HD Volume 6, which brings over 4,000 new effects to add to your arsenal of sounds. From the deepest depths of the ocean to the highest peaks of the mountaintops, whatever the mood or circumstance, General HD 6 will cover it. This new library comes with rich metadata in UCS format and is available in 24-bit 96K resolution. Head over to sound-ideas.com to learn more. Hello and welcome to Tonebenders. My name is Tim Muirhead and I'm at Riot Games in California to talk with the sound editorial team from the groundbreaking Netflix animated series Arcane. Through 2 series, the show has wowed audiences with a soundscape that more than matches the series' stunning animations. We're here with both the sound editorial supervisors and the composers. So let's meet them right now. First up, we have Arcane Supervising Sound Editors and Sound Designers, Eliot Connors and Brad Beaumont. Thanks for having me today.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
We also have Seaver and Alex Temple, who combined to create and compose the innovative music on the series. It's great to meet you guys.
Nice to meet you, too.
Something that I'm really excited about today is that we have both the sound design and the music team. Something about this series tells me that you must have worked together a lot. This isn't a show that just came together on the mix stage where the sound designers first heard the music for the first time kind of thing, which does happen a lot, but that wouldn't be possible for the way this series works. Maybe Ellie, do you want to start with how that came together?
Yeah, I think this is a really unique situation where, because we're all in-house, we were able to communicate weekly, bounce ideas off each other, and we're able to pre-dub before we got to the final stage in here, in the room that you're in now. Creating a show or a film is kind of this incredible creative experience, and you kind of have to create this environment for creativity to thrive in. Not just with sound and music. Riot has done that in every department. They've created this space for people to try ideas, fail, improve, and by doing so, you're able to push the boundaries and try new things, and you're not scared to try them. And I think that's able to be done because of trust. Christian trusts all of us to take this show to the highest level, and with that trust, you're able to just kind of create, and bounce things off each other. And I guess the beauty of this group is we take everybody's note very seriously because we know that it's something worthy to explore. Everybody here listens to everybody, and it's kind of this incredible creative experience that is Arcane. So many little parts in this show that we could show how we made that happen with the music and sound design, but it's an incredible experience.
Alex?
Yeah, I mean, to what Eliot said, there was a lot of really, really fun fights going down in this very theater. and we talk about it all the time here, but it's one of the things I'm the proudest of is some of the problems that we solved that felt unsolvable before, or also felt like, I don't know if this is even possible to actually figure this out. Some of these fight sequences with expansive pop soundtrack that we had over the thing, it just kind of felt like, how in the world are you going to be able to deliver both of these stories in a cohesive way? One of the things that was a real gift for all of us was coming from season 1, sort of beginning to invent a lot of this stuff, and then season 2 really feeling a lot of confidence and a lot of trust from the people above us at Fortiche and our showrunner Christian to just be let's actually see what we can do here. A couple of these sequences in particular, especially in season 2, I'm just so proud of the sound, what we were able to accomplish, and it really just comes from us all being obsessed with the story. And when it's so story first, there's no egos. It's everybody's has confidence and a lot of fire about their ideas because they think those ideas are the right ideas for the storytelling. And then any of us could convince any of the other ones, actually consider it from this angle. I just found myself a lot of times being I never even really thought about sound as much as now I'm thinking of it. And all of these are just tools in the storytelling device. And sometimes there's not a right way to do a scene. There's just a couple different ways to kind of go about it. And that was one of my favorite things about this season in particular was really starting to sharpen that blade.
The kind of the concept we kind of refer to sometimes as the baton pass between sound and music and dialogue. It was so fluid. By the time we got to the mix stage, it was just whatever was going to serve the story the most. It's pretty dope.
Alex Temple, how is it for you?
Typically a composer, if they're not working closely with a sound team, they might try to think about, like, how do I tell the full story for the scene with music? But I think a lot of the time with our sort of like daily Slack exchanges with Eliot and Brad, as we're starting to digest, like, how do we want to approach the scene, there were a lot of moments where I'm just like, yes, musically, we might logically want to hit this with a big musical moment, but maybe I should check with Eliot first to see if he's also going to hit that with this massive sub boom. And if he does that, I can clear out of the way and I can sort of work around that, and in a way where they sort of complement each other and do the baton pass, as Brad said, rather than us both trying to tell the complete story and then being kind of disappointed when you get to the mix stage, like, oh, I can't hear my music or I can't hear my sound design. Like, why did I spend all that time working on this if it's just going to get turned down?
Getting to the mix stage and not having those surprises and not having like the bad feels about like, well, where's all the Foley? Or where's all this? Yeah, we knew all that kind of when we got there, and then we could really just focus on, all right, let's really polish the hell out of this thing and really make it shine. I mean, there's just so many instances of organic collaboration between sound and music. I mean, even going back to season 1, we've probably talked about it before, but I mean, the first couple episodes working with like Temple and like just sending him a Slack message like, so for all the Hextech magic stuff, like what key are you working in on those cues? And he would just shoot over some ideas, and then it's like, okay, I'm gonna try to tune any like library sound design that we're making for all this blue magic stuff, all the crystals and stuff. Let's just try to tune that to whatever that was. I can't remember what key it was. I want to say D minor.
Well, it varied.
It varied.
So we retuned it for each scene.
Yeah. D minor sticks out in my head, but yeah, I think you're right. But I mean, just those kinds of conversations, it's just such a luxury to have that, like have direct, instantaneous access to each other was just so cool.
And knowing how much energy to put into a particular scene, knowing where Temple was going to hit a big moment for music, I knew that I didn't have to spend much time on that particular section, and I could focus my energy on like the section where I was going to go ham and like really spend time on, developing new sounds and making that full and memorable. You have to pick at it because it's so overwhelming. There's so much stuff going on. It was a luxury to know, okay, well, I don't need to worry about this because this is an obvious music moment. But then there's the things like, with Seaver writing the OST songs, and a lot of those OST songs that you worked on, it was the exact opposite. We had to be synced up. Like every beat in the music needed to be synced up with not only the punches or whatever transient I was working on, but like the visuals, which is a whole other subject. But
because when you look at some of these scenes in advance, you're like, all right, this is where I'm going to take a big old home run swing. And the nice part about this is I got to be aware of what your guys' big home run swings were. Yeah. And then we got to actually, because some of those things, there were times where I'd be like, oh, wait, even though this action sequence is really meaty, this is not my moment. Like, and I would be like, I want this to be, especially something like that 0G thing in the finale where I was like, oh yeah, Eliot's gonna cook here, so I'm just gonna like pre-plan for some, and like that was probably the greatest thing ever, was just to be like aware at the very beginning and then to kind of then marry it together as we go through.
And then you could put your energy into something else, not waste time, it's huge.
It's huge, yeah.
The sound design in the show is super detailed, but then every once in a while there's a music drop that the music gets so forefronted that all of a sudden the sound design is left to moments. One hit here, one hit, where in other scenes it's the lead up, the whoosh, the hit, the impact. And like, how do you decide which of those 5 things is going to be the one that you choose to cut through when the music is huge like that?
I think in a lot of those moments, the sound design is to enhance the musical song and the experience that music is bringing to the visuals and the story. We kind of knew ahead of time we really knew ahead of time when those musics were going to hit. We knew Fortiche would get the music, and Seaver can get into this too, but like they would get the music early and do animations designed to the music so that the visuals lacked up to the beats. And in those moments, it was going to be just using the correct sound to enhance that drum or that visual or that moment, but always being in sync. That meant being out of sync with sound design in a lot of ways. Like,
with the visuals.
Yeah, like a lot of punches are out of sync just because it's not in time with the beat of the music. And I would give notes to Seaver about, hey man, can you hit this? Or can you hit this? And I'm sure at the end it was like super annoying because, I gave a lot of notes like that, but it's extremely difficult to do that with music. Like you can't, if you hit this moment, you got to change everything that's leading up to that because it's out of tempo. And I wouldn't sit here and try to explain that very well because I'm not a composer and my musical theory is very limited, but I can hear when it's right.
just like clarifying too for people that haven't seen the show, like it has a traditional sound like score soundtrack to it, but then the show's identity is also like split into this thing where we do these bespoke songs that are performed by international artists that are basically needle drops like you described, and so the rules I think of the relationship of sound and music, we kind of developed maybe two rule books, one for the sound when it's traditional score and then the sound when it's a song. What Eliot's getting to is like also the rules of songwriting are just a little bit more rigid and intense than scoring. Scoring, I feel, can be very fluid, and Alex was our like fearless leader on just like leading the entire way through the score. But on the songs, it's this thing of like, if you have an artist like Sting start singing a verse, there's just an expectation that Sting is going to be audible and you will continue hearing him sing. You're not going to chop it up and suddenly go into a 7/8, time signature because it hits picture a little better. The things I'm already missing about Arcane was having all those notes from Eliot and just battling over which ones are important. Like, when does it need to sync? When does it not need to sync? And I always felt like I was suddenly convinced of a whole lot more things that I wasn't thinking about, and probably vice versa. And it was just this really fun experience of like, when are we Mickey Mousing this thing and it's ridiculous looking versus like, no, when is this actually threading into the scene and adding more depth because of the relationship of sound, music, and picture.
One of the amazing things that Seaver and Seb, they were able to do with these OST songs was they were able to write them for the show and not for the album. And I know that like, that sounds crazy, but like I feel like you guys did an amazing job to make the song work for the picture, and your head was always in that space, which is amazing because I've been on a lot of shows where that's not the case. It's like this is Beyonce, and this is staying Beyonce, and she's going to be the loudest thing possible. We don't care that there's ships exploding and whatever, but they did a really good job of like mapping out the fact that this was for a show and syncing up to the visuals and the story. And I think that's you guys did an incredible job on that.
If you start early enough, have all those conversations, you really start to learn. I mean, we're talking with Fortiche, the animation studio. Why is a song here? What's important? A lot of times I'm like, oh, they're going to do it hand painted in charcoal. I didn't realize that sequence is going to look like that. Like, they're aspiring to these great things with the mediums that they're choosing in the art. And so when you have this whole huddle beforehand, and then for those of us on the music team that also are like familiar with scoring and songwriting, we were able to start to design the songs so that they would work to picture in that kind of really deep sync way that you don't normally get if you just sort of music edit a song onto a movie at the very end of the process. It was a whole other story of just working with all these artists to get them to buy into this process too, because it's very unconventional, and in a lot of ways it's not how pop songs get written. And I think that was probably why we all found this project so fulfilling. It's like, we're doing a lot of things that like doesn't quite feel like it's how it's normally done. So let's start to invent this rubric as we go.
Temple and I would do the same thing. I remember 209, like those explosions in the war scene, kind of syncing up the drums for that whole moment. Like, it wasn't just for the OST songs we were doing this too. We were doing it for score side too, and it was extremely successful. The drums were a thing.
I think this sort of goes to a little bit to the point that Seaver was making earlier about like how you have certain liberties you can take when you're creating the sort of the meter grid for a score piece that you don't have for a song. Like, if that drum piece had been a song, like we would need to stick to that 4/4 grid, but the vocabulary of scoring, especially action scoring, it's so common to hear those sort of mixed meter, like like where it's just constantly sort of pivoting and shifting time signatures in ways that hopefully are kind of imperceptible. The reality is a lot of the time you're hearing the sound of a composer reacting to picture changes that happen after the music had already started to being written. So a scene like that where it's like, okay, well, we need the drums to hit a little bit differently in relationship to this explosion. It's like we can just drag the entire grid, just sort of see like, okay, if we do this, how does this impact this other hit here? How does it impact this other hit here? Which is the most important one? And there's a sort of a hierarchy of what are your sort of like your most important points, and then which are the ones that you can let go. And then sometimes, you're like, oh, if I do this, it's going to shift everything. It's going to mess up my other hit points later on. And then you shift it and you realize not only does it not matter, but it actually creates new fortuitous hit points that you weren't even thinking about hitting before, where you're like, actually that feels really good now because this hits when she's opening the door and it didn't hit that before. So it's a fun process, not just in terms of collaboration, but just like sort of rediscovering how the music can work to a scene.
Happy accidents.
Yeah, the thing that reminded me of too that I felt like was so cool about us four working was like the risks we started taking with diegetic and non-diegetic stuff. Like it got really fun, especially like episode 207 where we're just kind of like, all right, now we're really going to start blending this in where it's like music tracks are being heard full focus that are suddenly getting warped into the bar. Okay, who's responsible for designing that? Am I doing some of this filtering? Do I pass this off to Eliot?
Yeah.
Like when and where do these things happen, and how much fun can we have with starting to play with that stuff?
And again, this goes back to this incredible creative space that Christian and Riot have created for us, like to be able to try these things and not be scared to try them. Hey, if it works, that sounds awesome. Let's go with that. Like we were kind of given a keys in the way, and we were able to try some things that maybe you weren't able to do in a different situation, which I absolutely love because you could push the boundaries and like try something new. And otherwise you kind of fall into the that was been done before kind of category. And we were able to take some chances, and I think it was noticed.
Creative freedom is one thing, but time is another thing.
Mm-hmm.
Someone can say you have all the creative freedom in the world, but then when they say it's got to be done by noon tomorrow, I'm assuming that time played a role as well. Like you guys had a little more.
We had a little more time, for sure. But I think
For episodes 1 through 3, we had a lot of time.
yeah, we did. Yeah, I mean there was a lot of factors with season 2 that messed with time, with schedules, with calendars, COVID, rewrites, all that kind of stuff. It was. We did find ourselves with some time, probably too much time in certain places, right? Like after the first couple episodes. But gosh, when we got to that last, that back 6, we were moving along at a pretty good clip.
Yeah, I would say the back 6 was pretty normal schedule. The beauty of Riot and having this space and time is that we were able to develop ideas early and have this kind of library of, we kind of knew this was coming. So we were able to record early and like design things early. I don't know, music-wise, probably able to think about, hey, we're going to do this approach for this and map things out. We definitely had time to play, which is just the way it should be. I mean, we do this for our players to give them an experience that they'll remember for the rest of their lives. And I think we were able to deliver that. And I think that this show deserves to have the time to take the chances, to do the creative exploration that you want. The visuals deserve an exploration in sound and music. I'm grateful that we were given that time.
With music, one of the things that time certainly benefits for everything else as well, I'm sure, but is if you don't have a lot of time, you kind of have to rely on those instincts that you've honed over, doing many projects like this, where it's just like the first draft, it doesn't need to be perfect, but it needs to be good enough. So you kind of have to go back to your old bag of tricks, and it's like, all right, this is this kind of emotional scene. I'll do types of emotional chord progressions that I've just kind of like internalized at this point, and it might be functionally effective, but it's not going to be necessarily inventive. And I think that by having time, it almost allows you to question that, where it's like, okay, this kind of action scene, this kind of action scoring, let's not try doing that because that's the obvious choice. It's the choice that makes sense, but what if we did something totally different? And knowing that you have time to pursue some alternative exploration, even if it doesn't work out, like you'll still have time to go back and take a safer path. And obviously not every scene needs to be like completely reinvented in terms of what it is, but it allows you to sort of pick and choose your moments. And it allows you to just sort of like, with the schedule, rob Peter to pay Paul a little bit, where it's like, technically we should be moving on to episode 4 now, but because this is a really pivotal moment in episode 3 and we know that we have like a little bit of buffer time down the road, we can afford to spend like an extra week or so trying out different things on the scene just to make sure we really get it right. But yeah, even though we had fairly luxurious amount of time by many standards, it did still feel like by the time we got to episode 9, like or well in advance of episode 9, where we were kind of feeling like all hands on deck at all times. Like we got
to... episode 9 is pretty epic as well. So
well, it is. And in retrospect, I remember when I was originally making the music schedule, I just kind of like, I was like, all right, what's our final mix date for episode 9? What's today's date? Let's just divide that by 9. I probably should have basically doubled the amount of time spent on episode 9 and then, subdivided the others by 8.
You were still able to write one of the most beautiful scores I've ever heard in my entire life.
How long did that cue take?
Which one?
That one in episode 9, the Victor Jace masterpiece.
This is the moment where, Victor and Jace have the kind of, I don't know, how would you explain that scene? Like
Victor, his image for how the world should work is kind of broken by Jace sort of finally getting through to him, and then they sort of decide to sort of come together as a force to undo some of what Victor has done. Musically, it was very challenging because it was also a scene where, and I hope Fortiche isn't upset by this, but I didn't particularly like the temp music they had chosen. A lot of the time, Fortiche is actually very, very good about temp music, and in some ways, you're kind of trying to live up to the temp music. But in this case, I was just kind of, what am I going to do here? Because the temp music doesn't make a whole lot of sense here, and it's such a long scene, such an emotionally pivotal scene. I think it's actually one where it just, maybe because I wasn't sort of like internalizing any kind of temp music anyway, where I just like, all right, let's just try some things and sort of understand what it is about this temp music choice that they might find appealing, but take that and remove everything else. That was one of probably a handful of like big musical moment cues where I actually feel like it was kind of like the first approach that I was taking that ended up, through much trial and error, ended up being the final one, where it wasn't like, let's go back to the drawing board and try something totally different.
When I heard that cue, I think I literally deleted everything I had and I started over.
Wow.
Because I was just murdering it, and I was like, "Wow, this deserves not what I have here."
Yeah.
That's what I think is so cool, is being able to be fluid and be flexible, and like, because you're gonna discover. I'm sure Alex, before writing that, didn't know, will I end up, liking this or not. I feel the same way about some of mine, where I'm like, all right, this needs to be good, and I hope it turns out that way. But when somebody else actually has a breakthrough, and you're like, this is a shining moment. Let's make sure everybody regroups to feature that as part of the story.
I remember doing a playback on that scene specifically once we started getting visuals in, and Eliot had worked on that and done so much cool sound design shit, and we were just sitting there talking. We're like, we gotta just mute all this.
That's crazy.
I redid the whole scene.
Too good. Like, nobody cares about any of the golden beings flying around. Just let this Victor's theme, this recurring, like, it's such a great callback, right? Like that Victor's theme, it's one of the best, I think, one of the best aspects of music for both seasons. For me,
another bullet point beauty of this team, like, we are all able to pivot and we have no ego to say, I just spent weeks on this, I want to hear it. It doesn't matter. Is this the best thing for the story? Like, that music cue is amazing. I don't really care about what I just created. Let's just get rid of it.
We don't have those moments where it's the Brad show, it's the Alex show, it's the Eliot show. It's like, it's Arcane. It's like, what's the coolest thing for Arcane?
I also really like the process when we'd get through a couple cues and we'd have already spotted the show and there's temp music, and then we'd get a ping from one of you guys like, guys, I think there's too many cues. Like, I think we need a break. And like the ability to just sort of dislodge after spending a week or 2 weeks on a cue to be like, we don't need this here. It's for the betterment of the episode. Some of those zoomed out things you don't really have context on until you're like actually moving through.
Yeah.
Like, we created a lot of negative space and changes, which is
so important.
It's like a picture cut in a way.
Yeah.
There were a lot of moments where we had to change the idea so that the story progressed and stayed exciting. I know Woodkid moment in 103 is another one. That cue with Echo on the bridge is another moment I think of where we just went into that darkness.
That was so cool. I love that. I love leaning in. Like, I knew you were going to hard cut for like almost in a horror sort of way. So I love leaning into the music there to crescendo as lush and beautiful as possible, knowing that you're going to just guillotine chop it all off. Like, those moments are really fun when you start to learn, like, let's do a move here.
Those are the things we were able to try out early and be like, oh, that works, or that doesn't work, we got to pivot. Like, having that ability is so pivotal in like creating an amazing story.
I want to tell you all about a really cool mic that I've been using a lot lately in my own work. It's called the O-Mini, and it's a miniature omnidirectional mic with a really neutral frequency response. I recently went to a frozen pond to record some skating sounds. When you record skating in an actual rink, you quickly find out that they are extremely reverberant. So I wanted to record outdoors where there's no walls for the sounds to bounce off of. So I grabbed my pair of O-Minis and I taped them to my legs just above my skates, and I hit the ice. The O-Minis handled the cold without issue, and I got the sounds I was after. There are a couple cool things about this mic that drew me to it. First up, each mic is handmade by Chris Trevino, a practicing field recordist and a really engaged member of the sound community. He puts a lot of work into making and testing each mic to ensure they live up to his high standards. Secondly, they are ultrasonic capable, which makes manipulating my recordings with them a lot of fun. I have 2 O-Minis personally, and they have been great to work with. In addition to the skating sounds, I've recorded other things like footsteps in snow, paper foley, and lots more. Maybe my favorite things about the O-Minis is the price. They are extremely affordable. At $150 American for a stereo match pair, they offer a lot of value. I suggest you give them a try. At this price, you really can't go wrong. To learn more, head to chrisatrevino.com or click on the link in the description of this episode in your podcast app. So, Brad, we've talked a lot about the sound design. But there's a lot of sound design with vocals kind of thing, like treatments of dialogue and such like that.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about how you approach that?
Yeah, there were certainly a lot of instances this season, both with like the Black Rose and like sort of the evolution of Victor's voice, that posed a really interesting challenge. I think we're actually looking at it up on the screen right now. I think this is when Victor comes out of the hex goo in episode 2. Yeah, the idea was with Christian and Alex, like Alex Yee.
Too many Alexes.
So many Alexes. All of the Alexes. They just wanted...
Sorry, Christian and Alex are your directors?
Showrunners, creators, writers. They just wanted it to feel off, right? Like there was something like it's not evil. It's not, bad necessarily. It's what is the bioorganic mechanical thing that was done to Victor's vocal cords or whatever that is. And we're seeing him very changed, like from a visual perspective, right? He's just being completely overtaken by the hex core and all that. And how can we kind of convey that with something like very subtle on his voice? And we played around for a bit, probably like a few days, and ended up with something pretty subtle that kind of comes and goes. But then once we get into, episode 8, we kind of leaned into what do players expect to hear from Victor? Like what does a long time Victor main that has 5,000 games on Victor? What is that person wanting to hear? So we kind of leaned into that a little bit. Dialed it back for intelligibility in episode 9, but that was a lot of fun working with Harry Lloyd, Victor's actor. He did a lot of different takes in the ADR process after the fact. We'd play back, production, look at the new visuals, and say like, okay, can you just give me a read that's just very cold, very almost computer-ish, right? And just using that as a whole layer and processing that in a certain way. Okay, can we do one where maybe you do have a bit of a not evil, but just a sinister vibe, right? Building these different vocal processes basically for all these different takes and being able to like weave those in and out of each other, have them as big chunks and big clip groups. I think we just organize them as folders in the session. I'm just like, here's straight up like robot OG Victor, here's, biomechanical Victor. And, just being able to sort of do these like little fader moves just to kind of like mix in different aspects of it.
Sorry, so what you're saying is you took his voice, processed it a few different ways.
Yeah.
And then
4 different ways.
4 different ways? 4?
I think for episode 9, the final total composite of Victor's voice was a combination of 4 different vocal approaches that were just living in different...
And then you would just adjust the faders to bring up this version of it more when he says something more
depending
sinister
on what
or something
he's saying.
like that.
There are moments where like he's passing in front of like the anomaly where maybe it's affecting it in a different way, or we're hearing it in more of a a vacuum or something. But that was a lot of fun.
And to give the ability to Penny, who was the dialogue mixer on here, give her the ability to have like the dry versus the processing, because we knew going to the stage we're like, this is going to be kind of hard to understand. So like having that stuff broke out the way that it was gave her the ability to raise just like regular old Victor so that we can understand. And I think that was valuable for sure.
Yeah, and also, versions that were using heavy parallel compression and like crazy transient modeling to kind of like really hit those consonants and things like that, just to kind of provide clarity. I mean, that was like, I think I lost sleep over some of that stuff. I'm like checking it on phones, can you understand what he's saying?
It's extremely simple to go like full processing. Yeah. The evolution of that, like where he starts, like how do you hint at it? What words do you hit? What letter do you hit? It's really hard to hint at something without going full processing. I think that was a huge challenge. And like the evolution of like, he's changing, he's different.
Yeah. We did a lot of fun stuff like that. I mean, with Amara's voice in episode 3, we had every woman in the loop group do a pass with like a different take, or maybe a couple different takes on top of the main actress's voice, and using that and just kind of like creating this weird kind of creepy thing that would just move around the room. That was a fun one. All the Black Rose stuff with Imaginary Sorceress and all that, and just sort of the morphing and the doubling, going from, her own voice to Mel's voice to, Kino's voice and Bessa's voice. That was a lot of fun. And having all of our cast sort of double her performance and stuff like that. That was fun.
The amount of music and sound design in this show is pretty insane, but the dialogue is, the true believability of animation. And then all of the ADR and group you had to do is quite a feat, man.
Is that what describing the process that you guys sort of doubled back on several episodes into season 2 and like redid your entire process of dialogue? Yes. And that was pretty crazy.
Yeah. I think after episode 5, we were all getting ready, and we mixed up episode 5 before Christmas, I think it was, right? Because we were all feeling pretty good. It was a Friday on the mix stage, final day of the 205 mix. We played it back, we played it down. Conversation sprung up about how are we feeling about just the general sound of the dialogue, just the general overall mix of the dialogue. It wasn't any like particular aspect of the chain. It was just like we were bumping up against a huge variety of dialogue recording spaces, microphones, because a lot of season 2 was recorded during COVID. So there was a lot of closet recordings. There was a lot of folks with the U87 in an amazing sounding room, and then there was some folks with the U87 in their closet, and maybe there's a hanger that fell off. And like, there's all kinds of crazy behind the scenes photos from season 2. I mean, Kevin Alejandro, who plays Jace, like he was recording under a jacket in his closet for like the first couple episodes, like crazy stuff like that. So it was like finding a way to get it all feeling cohesive and like
very high fidelity music and sound design. Made the dialogue feel not up to the level of everything else.
Yeah.
So we worked with Penny and Christian and Brad, and they put together a chain that essentially designed the dialogue and made it feel
a little bit more like pop vocal kind of. To kind of have it stand up against everything else that was going on. So it was a whole different process, and we went back and sort of, that was a...
So for the first 5 episodes, you went back?
We redid everything.
Went back and we implemented this. We implemented a new dialogue chain, going back to episode 1. That was a long winter break, thinking about that. But coming back, it was
breaking out to hives right now.
It was frustrating at the time, because it's like, gosh, we've made all this progress. We have this giant pile of done, right? And then you're like, but you're reopening that pile of done.
And it wasn't just replacing the dialogue. I think you guys realized that, hey, by having this like more high fidelity sounding dialogue that's like clearer, we can actually afford to sit it a little lower with respect to the music and sound. So then it's like, so by the way, not only is it the dialogue new, but we're also changing the overall balance of music and sound in a way that's, we got to like re-listen to everything for these first several episodes.
Oh, yeah.
Huge props to Andy and Penny taking that on. Yeah. Andy's the effects mixer and Penny's dialogue mixer. They got hit with a curveball and they killed it.
Oh, yeah. The pivots were real, and
they did a good job.
Yeah, it was a thing. But I'm glad we're on the other side of that.
That's the thing, you stop remembering the pain, like the scars sort of.
I want to talk about the fun time we recorded that.
But man, it gets dark sometimes when you're going through those.
But I mean, it made the show better. The right call for sure.
Every episode has something absolutely insane to talk about.
More stories, yeah.
Like you feel like in a series, usually you have a couple chill episodes, people are meeting people and like, going out to lunch. Every episode of Arcane is just completely bonkers.
That's part. I haven't had a chance to work on too many things of this scope, but that was, I think, part of like the feeling that I just had behind the scenes with all you guys, which is like, we got to make sure that we get this right because we want this thing to last. Like, we want to feel like proud of this thing in 2 years when we go back and listen back. We don't want to feel like we didn't turn over every single stone, and we're all kind of psychopathic in that way, where we're willing to go through the pain. But I just remember it was like this team feeling of like, let's do this the best of our possible ability. Yeah. Which is not, something that I feel with every project that I work on with the team that I'm with. It was kind of a unique group.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a good point. Like, I just feel in general in life, you want to surround yourself with people that are trying to reach the same bar. I think we all pushed each other. We're all trying to hit that level of excellence. And, I think we made each other better.
100%.
For sure.
The North Star was always like, are people that are fans of the show, are they going to be excited and feel proud to share it with people that may not be familiar with the IP or the games or anything like that? Like, I think it's the best when you bump into somebody or engage with somebody online and they're like, my parents don't care about games. They hate that I play League of Legends as much as I do, but I showed them Arcane and they loved it. And now we like are going to conventions and blah, 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 or whatever it is. And it's like that for me makes it all worth it, right? Like all the remixing 5 episodes of dialogue and then going back and do that. And it's so worth it because it's like, oh yeah, we literally did the best we could. Like there's no question about that. Everybody put 100%.
And part of it was just like we all wanted our sound story to live up to the paintings that we were. It was like kind of like it was like if
minor detail
the stuff Fortiche is delivering, you're like, this deserves as good a sound as you could possibly imagine and as good a music as you could possibly listen to. So like it was kind of like we just wanted to make them proud too.
Totally 100%.
It's like you could just scroll through any episode, press pause anywhere, and you're like, I want to frame this.
Yeah.
We've talked about how maybe ambitious is the right word. The visuals are, but it's the story that's super ambitious as well. There are a lot of characters. There's a lot of subplots all leading to come together towards the end. And we have characters that kind of disappear for full episodes. Maybe, Temple, do you want to talk about how you use themes or music to help tell that story and simplify it for the viewer a little bit?
I don't know about if we were successful in simplifying that, but I know that like in terms of like going back to even season 1, one of the first things we did was sort of like try to come up with a suite of themes for the characters. I think some of them were more successful than others, and some of them, the theme gets a lot of play throughout their appearances. Other ones, it's more of a subtle theme to begin with, and it kind of comes and goes. And then we also kind of worked on establishing like the sounds of Piltover and Zon musically within the scoring sense. Like the songs bring a whole new dimension to it that it's sometimes reflected in the score, but I think in general the songs, especially in season 1, also tended to be more in the Zon moments. Not so many big songs in the Piltover moments. By sort of like creating these templates of like, all right, this is kind of like broadly speaking what Piltover sounds like. This is what Zon sounds like. These are some themes from some of these Piltover characters and Zon characters. At the beginning of the story, you often have ways of like pretty cleanly presenting these by themselves because it might like be this is the first like grand unveiling of the Piltover skyline in episode 1 of season 1, or this is the first time we see this character and this is scene really focused on this character. The deeper into the story things get, the more you're kind of like these stop being separate themes and separate musical sort of palettes, and you're kind of interweaving them all together in a way where it's kind of like you need to make sure that they're clear enough to begin with, that they still sort of have that audible thread to survive and be decipherable to the extent that you want them to be decipherable. Once you start sort of like making these cues that are just sort of a combination of all sorts of different original sources. It can be fun to be very subtle about it, but sometimes you want to be very, very obvious about it. I know Brad was talking earlier about Victor's theme, which was kind of an interesting one because Victor's theme is, I think, one of the strongest character themes, just objectively speaking, in terms of like its shape as a melody and recognizability. But the thing with his character theme is that melodically it was very much speaking to the humanity of Victor, which we saw quite a bit of in season 1. We didn't really see much of it in season 2. So in season 2, there might be little hints of it, like little fragments of it here and there, but you almost don't hear it throughout the whole season. And then only in episode 9, in that sort of reconciliation moment between him and Jace, all right, let's just bring the theme back in like full force, like fully committed performance of it, where it's not trying to sort of be obfuscated and play it on some instruments that are subtle in the background, but it's like very much a foreground gesture in a moment that's already a foreground musical moment. It can be fun to sort of like, take the music on a journey like that in the storytelling. You guys were mentioning earlier wanting to get out of the way for the music in that moment. I remember when I had done the mix for the like the score albums, there were some moments that I had gotten so used to how the music sounded with like some of the tonal sound design that in retrospect I was like, I should have asked them for that sound design stem and actually like put it into the master, because for me it was how I remembered that the music is supposed to sound in that moment.
We designed a lot of things to work with music so that you can tell where it was happening, the blend was happening, which works sometimes. Sometimes you like when you do that, it just feels right. And you're like, you press play, like, yeah, that's it. Like, that's amazing. And sometimes when you're too close, it's not the right thing to do. I honestly think this Arcane has like a situation where they're blending, where sound design is just like front and forward, and then you like there's every single scenario for how you would edit or like present music versus sound design is happening in this show. Like I feel like we tried everything, and everything just it worked for the scene in different ways, and kind of like the OST songs hitting the sync. I think about the time where the gray enters in the arcade. You can't tell the difference between sound design and music in that scene. And it just feels right.
I think that sort of brings up another point for me, which is an approach that we did in season 2, which is a bit different than in season 1, especially with Christian, our creative director, was in season 1, we would have, I don't know how often you guys had sound reviews, but we would have, every week we would have music reviews that were very hyper-focused on music only, looking at specific scenes, and I think in some ways sort of missing the forest for the trees. In season 2, we actually were like, let's not share things, at least with Christian, until we have like a complete sonic picture, a first draft, not just of the scene and how the music and sound are working together, but like how does it flow through the entire episode. And I think it really sort of changed how we thought of the review and approval process, but I think it also allowed us to not feel like we had to necessarily do quite as much within our own worlds. Like earlier I was talking about how a composer or a sound designer, when they're looking at a scene, they might feel like they have to tell the whole story. And if you're having music that's being reviewed by itself, sometimes you kind of do.
You have to, yeah.
But if you are allowing your creative stakeholders to sort of take it all in at once, I know it's a lot to ask of them to say like, hey, here's the entire episode. Can you give us the notes on everything? But it also sort of allows them to just sort of experience the episode how someone's going to, like an audience member is going to experience it. They're not going to hear the music separately from the sound, separately from the dialogue processing. It does sort of allow them to hear how music and sound is working together to tell the story.
Yeah, that was a big push for me, just the pre-dubbing process, getting the mixes of everything, dialogue, music effects, what we're doing in front of Christian as a whole, because that is the story. I can't even tell you how many films I've been on where you go to the final mix stage and it's the first time I've heard something and I'm like, why didn't we talk about this before? Like, this is going to be the worst 2 weeks of my life. Like, for real. So, I mean, I was a big advocate for mix early, get ideas out early that are the full story. That presents the problems early, and then you pivot. And if you have that stuff dialed in, I mean, you could tell the best stories possible. I'm really proud about how that worked out on this season for sure.
Having those big, like, monolithic reviews before the final mix that we would send out to both Fortiche and to Christian and Alex, that was huge. Getting to the mix stage then, and then, like, the notes are just... God, we got nitpicky, and it was great. Like, you know, the notes coming in from them at the mix stage was just nothing big. There were no big surprises like, oh, why does the Mercury hammer sound like this? It's like, you know.
Fortiche is in Paris. That's where the directors are. And the big motivator to get mixes in front of them early was, obviously, we had not only language barriers, but time barriers.
Like time zone barriers.
Yeah, and they're like, they're super busy. To like review the sound effect pass on a Mercury hammer is just a waste of time. So like getting the mixes in front of them is what they want and what they're interested in, because that motivates the decisions they're making with visuals and edit. We really wanted to get temp mixes into their edit so that they knew what they were dealing with and if their picture cut made sense to the sounds that we were creating. And it was a huge way to communicate because they would have our mix stems, and they wouldn't even need to really give us notes. You could look at the AAF and you could be like, oh, well, they put this dialogue we had line back in. I think they want this in. Or they changed this edit in the music here. Temple, what do you think about that? Or like, you know, they put it in an off-screen sound here. Oh, they're trying to tell a story about something going on here that we didn't think about. Our notes were kind of given to us through the AAF, which was pretty cool. And it's just like, it's that communication you have that no words need to be said. It's just kind of like you understand it by seeing the sound, which I thought worked really well.
There's moments that I really enjoyed where dynamics come into play. There's massive battles happening. The music is huge. Things are exploding. But then there's always these quiet moments where it comes down. And my favorite one, I think, Seaver, you alluded to it, the 0G sequence, where all of a sudden the music kind of comes down and also the sound effects suddenly change in like EQ shelving and stuff like that. But the pictures didn't really change. The pictures kind of continued on. So it seems to me obviously wasn't there, that was something that was conceived by the sound team.
The process where Eliot would just kind of like do a quick riff pass and then send it over and then just be like, what do you think? What is this doing for you guys? What would you do on the music around this kind of thing? That was one of those ones where I think we just kind of like incrementally tried a couple things back and forth. And then I don't know at what point it came together for you, Eliot.
I remember what it was. Arno said Ad Astra to me at one point in time. That was it. Like, not like a section in the movie or anything like that. It was just like...
This is the George Clooney movie. Was it George
Brad Pitt.
Brad Pitt,
sorry,
yeah.
Brad Pitt. Space film from 4 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, and I don't know who did this, but essentially there are moments where there's over-exaggerated sounds in this kind of space station where there's a lightning strike and this like crazy synth sound happens that you would never experience. Like, that was the scene that I listened to and I was like, okay, so I think he's just saying like, this needs to be bonkers.
I remember you sent me that clip, and I don't think what we ended up with even really sounded like that clip.
No.
But it was the feeling that gave you that I think really kicked us all off.
This just needs to change to be a different thing in this moment and sell that, Victor is creating this energy that is sucking the entire sound out of it and manipulating how when you touch things, it's going to sound crazy. And I just started playing with distortion and really just taking things to the point where they were completely broken.
Well, there was aspects to it that almost sounded like 8-bit. And then I remember trying to figure out what I was going to do with the ADR because I had Haley, who played Vi, Ella, who played Jinx, doing all these efforts. And then I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, yeah, maybe we'll just, we'll low pass them or something like that. But hearing like what happened with the effects and like this weird stuttery digital aspect to it, I was on the mix stage, like pulling my hair out, trying to figure out how to make that match with the sound effects stuff.
But that was the glue that made it happen. I remember there was an effort that happened when they go by and it had that crazy little like effect to it. And it's just like little simple things. Because when you have silence or like not much going on, the one sound that happens has to be pretty interesting for it to play it, or to like carry it. To hit a transient after silence that just knocks you on your face is really impactful. And then you go into Seaver's Q and like there was a lot of handoffs between all of us for that scene that really kind of worked out. And I remember when you were making the music, you were kind of like, what am I going to do here?
Yeah, I just remember feeling like we were all kind of like in that weird, like, all right, we don't know exactly where we're aiming, but we wander through it.
In episode 9 in particular, especially those later, maybe the later third of the episode, we were working with incomplete picture in terms of effects and stuff like that. And these are effects heavy scenes where you're like, I don't know what this is actually going to look like once they do 2D effects and, all the compositing. Whereas when you're just seeing like the 3D models flying around, you're kind of like, you're just doing your best, I guess.
Everybody at Fortiche was just grinding to get this episode done. And I remember we were just looking at shot grid, just watch shots come in. And it's like, okay, we're getting the vibe of this. Maybe we can like stitch together a little thing. And it was right down to the wire on that.
I remember hitting the sound for the rocket from Jinx to make sure that it did a sound in the beat to when Seaver's music came back in so that, it was kind of like connected in a way. Mm-hmm. They would give me a click track and then I would know where to hit certain things or cheat them to be in time with the music. Every time he had to make changes, he'd give me a new click track and I could just like sync things up to it. And I remember there's so many moments in this season where that music and sound design work together. But I think my favorite moment is the start of that song with Smeech's arm when it's like I tuned all of his spinning of his arm to the start of the music and then it goes to the gunshot. And it's like, I just love, there's so much of that stuff in this season that's just like enhancing the song. It just works.
One of the things I really loved about the approach to the sound design, there's a lot of process sounds, there's a lot of hyper-real sounds, but it's all based in an organic. When the crystal goes in our main character's gun and it blasts, that's a big sci-fi blast, but it's also surrounded by the mechanics of the gun. Do you want to talk about that approach of how you took these very surrealistic images at times and grounded them in an organic way?
I used to work for Riot before I came to Riot. I'm just curious how many times I maybe got the note that it sounds too sci-fi.
Yeah, I think the word organic, it gets used so much with regards to like League of Legends core sound design and then like by extension Arcane sound design. There's an aspect of it that's born out of admiration for stuff like Star Wars, honestly. Like for so many sound folks, right? We're informed by Star Wars and like Ben Burtt's approach to like recording real things to like have that elicit like an emotion in someone, right? Like there's just something about an actual recorded sound that's processed. You can still feel the soul behind it as it pertains to like the magic and the different categories of like sound design that may be different weapon powers and things like that. Like, yeah, surrounding that with organic sounds like Foley, right? Or something that we've recorded just kind of help ground it to the image. And I think for a lot of it has to do with Fortiche and the animation and just sort of the amount of detail that's, you're talking about like Jinx's zapper pistol, right? Like we see every little freaking component of that thing move. And, you know, maybe in other styles of animation, you wouldn't see that. But I think when we do see that stuff, it's like, well, we don't necessarily need to cover every little thing, but like we need to like feel that because it's so front and center and it's so detailed and rich and real, and like we want to do good or do right by that, and having any of our stuff feel grounded in that, like coming from an actual organic space, has been really important and like really front of mind for a lot of what we do.
A lot of the magic sources within the lore of Runeterra have some sort of organic characteristics or story behind them.
A lot of it's processed glass recordings or crystal recordings, or gosh, even going back 10 15 years in the sound design history of League of Legends, like a lot of that stuff is some kind of a processed organic thing, and in a lot of cases maybe it's a bell or a symbol that's been bowed or something like that. And whether or not it was by design back then, I don't know, but I think that there is just this pull towards something that helps to keep it grounded.
When you hear a synthesizer, you get categorized. You hear it a lot on sci-fi shows these days, and you can kind of instantly say, that's sci-fi. In my mind, those sounds are, I don't want to say they're easy to make, they're just the first thing to think about to make. I always try to challenge myself to make things out of either recordings that I make or organic things, in the world that aren't necessarily synthesizers. That's not to say that I don't use synthesizers, because I do enhance things a lot, especially transients. I find you can get some great tonal stuff out of some of the instruments these days, but that stuff alone will give you a story of sci-fi, an instantaneous thought. No matter what you do, it puts it into a category. And I think you have to ground that with something that's more organic to make it feel like the way that you felt. It takes you out of that space when you hear the mechanisms more than the synthesizer. Arcane actually allows you to do that too. The visuals don't instantly say sci-fi, so you don't want to really make sci-fi sounds. It wouldn't exactly enhance the visual the correct way. And I feel like a lot of the magic that's portrayed in Arcane, it's connected to an organism or a body. And I'm looking at Victor right now, so I'm like, he's got magic inside of him. And you're able to take those chances in animation too, to do weird stuff. Like, I know the birds that fly around in episode, I think it's 207, I made out of goats. And
really?
I always do weird stuff like that because it's fun and it's different, and I like taking chances and seeing if I can make something sound different than what it's supposed to. But still, it's got to be close because the human brain wants to say, "Oh, that's a bird. It's not a goat." But it's fun to say that you used a goat instead of a bird.
Thanks a lot for talking with me today and inviting me into your studio. This has been awesome. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks, Tim. I appreciate it. Thanks for doing this podcast, man. I've learned. I think I speak for everybody, where we really appreciate you spending the time to do this. I know it's hard to do two jobs, and I'm sure a lot of people appreciate it. As I get deeper into my career, the mentoring aspect becomes bigger and bigger, and I think doing stuff like this and having avenues for people up and coming in the industry to learn about how to create and how to get into the industry. And I love seeing more and more of that. I think it's really important.
I mean, we're both products of that kind of environment, right? Where it was a lot of, hey, would you mind if I just came into your room and just sat on the couch in the back and just watched you work for, a couple hours, or asked you questions and, bought you lunch or something. And that was one of the great things about working at Sound Deluxe back in the day, was just you're surrounded by folks working on film, working on TV, working on games, all in one building. If you're passionate about something, it's like, hey, can I hang out with you and ask you questions? And sometimes it's like, I'm busy, but more often than not, it was, yeah, sure, let's talk about it. Let's find some time. And that really, I'm going to say the O word again, organic, just sort of organic, ad hoc, sort of bumping into people and saying, oh, I heard what you did on such and such film. How did you do that? Oh, let me show you. it's harder to find that these days. And I think it is, avenues like this and outlets like this where people are sharing knowledge and just sharing stories and their experiences is vital. So props to you for doing this, man.
Oh, shucks. Thanks, guys. That was a lot of fun. Got to tour around the Riot Games Campus. It's such an amazing place. If you want more Arcane coverage, search out my interview with the re-recording mix team in episode 309. Check out one of Sound Ideas' latest new libraries, the General HD Volume 6, which brings over 4,000 new effects to add to your arsenal of sounds. From the deepest depths of the ocean to the highest peaks of the mountaintops, whatever the mood or circumstance, General HD 6 will cover it. This new library comes with rich metadata in UCS format and is available in 24-bit 96K resolution. Head over to sound-ideas.com to learn more. Tonebenders is produced by me, Timothy Muirhead. Theme music is by Jim Guthrie. You can reach me via email through info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow Tonebenders on Instagram to stay on top of new episodes. If you like the show, you can help us out by spreading the word to your friends and colleagues, or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click support.